Rejection therapy, a modern Stoic approach to conquering fear. Fear of rejection isn't just holding you back, it's actually stealing your life. Every time you avoid asking for what you want, every opportunity missed because of that voice in your head saying, "They'll say no." That's not caution, that's imprisonment. I spent years trapped in that cell until I discovered something that changed everything. Rejection therapy through Stoic principles. The ancients knew what modern psychology confirms. Our fears shrink when directly confronted. What if I told you that deliberately seeking rejection for 30 days could permanently rewire your brain? That Epictetus and Seneca had a psychological hack for fear that works better than any modern self-help technique? In the next few minutes, I'll share the exact method that transformed me from someone paralyzed by the prospect of a no into someone who now sees rejection as merely information, not a death sentence. Your freedom begins today. 1. The reverse ownership principle. Have you ever noticed how we talk about rejection? I got rejected. Rejection happened to me, as if rejection is something external that attacks us, like a virus or a physical blow. But what if I told you that the most powerful shift in conquering rejection fear comes from a complete reversal in how you view the experience itself? Most people spend their lives trying to avoid rejection at all costs. They play it safe, stay quiet, and never ask for what they truly want. But here's the radical truth. Rejection isn't something that happens to you. It's something you collect, something you own, something you seek out deliberately. This is the foundation of what I call the reverse ownership principle, the first of 10 powerful techniques I'll share with you today. Think about collectors of art, stamps, rare coins. They don't see each addition to their collection as a loss or a failure. They see it as an achievement, a testament to their dedication. What if you viewed rejection the same way? I want you to create what I call a rejection portfolio. This isn't just a mental exercise, I mean a physical or digital document where you record every rejection you receive. Date it, describe it, and most importantly, celebrate it. Because each entry isn't evidence of your inadequacy. It's proof of your courage. When I first started my rejection therapy journey, I challenged myself to get rejected at least once a day for 30 days. At first, it was terrifying. But as my portfolio grew, something strange happened. I began to feel proud of these rejections. Each no became a badge of honor. The ancient Stoic philosopher Epictetus said, "It's not what happens to you, but how you react to it that matters." He understood a fundamental truth. Events themselves have no inherent power over us. Only our judgments about those events do. When you actively seek rejection, you transform it from a feared enemy into a valuable resource. The more rejection you collect, the stronger you become. Each no builds your immunity to fear. Each rejection is evidence that you're living boldly, asking for what you want, and expanding your comfort zone. People who fear rejection the least are often those who've been rejected the most, but with one crucial difference. They've learned to own those rejections, to collect them proudly rather than avoid them shamefully. So your first step in Stoic rejection therapy is to flip the script completely. Start seeing rejection not as something that happens to you, but as something you deliberately collect as evidence of your growing courage. 2. The premeditatio ridiculi, premeditation of ridicule. What's the worst that could happen? Most of us ask this question but never actually answer it. We leave it hanging there, allowing our imagination to create vague but terrifying possibilities that paralyze us. But what if I told you that one of the most powerful techniques for overcoming rejection fear comes from deliberately and vividly imagining the worst possible outcome? The ancient Stoics had a practice called premeditatio malorum, the premeditation of evils. They would visualize worst-case scenarios in extensive detail to remove their sting. I've adapted this specifically for rejection fear into what I call the premeditatio ridiculi, the premeditation of ridicule. This is technique number 2 of our 10 Stoic approaches to conquering rejection fear. Here's how it works. Before facing a situation where rejection is possible, sit down and vividly imagine the absolute worst, most embarrassing rejection scenario possible. Don't just think about it vaguely. See it, hear it, feel it in extensive detail. Imagine the person not just saying no, but laughing. Imagine others witnessing your rejection. Imagine the awkward silence, the pit in your stomach, the heat in your face. Go overboard with it. Make it worse than any rejection. That could realistically happen. Why would you deliberately put yourself through this mental torture? Because something remarkable happens when you do. When you've already experienced the worst rejection scenario in your mind, the actual rejection, which is almost always milder, loses its power to surprise or devastate you. The Stoics understood what modern psychology now confirms. Anxiety thrives on uncertainty and surprise. By removing both through mental rehearsal, you disarm the fear before it can take hold. Let me introduce a practical exercise I call ridicule rehearsal. Before your next rejection opportunity, find a private space and physically act out both sides of the worst-case rejection scenario. Play both yourself and the person rejecting you. Make their rejection comically harsh, over the top, and ridiculous. One of my clients, Sarah, used this technique before asking for a raise. She imagined her boss not just saying no, but laughing hysterically, telling everyone in the office, and suggesting she was delusional for even asking. After visualizing this absurd scenario in detail, the actual conversation, where she received a polite "not at this time," felt completely manageable. By deliberately rehearsing ridicule, you create psychological antibodies against rejection's sting. You're training your nervous system to recognize that even the worst-case scenario is survivable. This technique works because it transforms vague, lurking fears into concrete scenarios that your mind can process and move beyond. The rejection bogeyman is always scarier before you turn on the lights and see what it really is. The premeditatio ridiculi doesn't just prepare you for rejection, it reshapes your relationship with it. Practice this before your next rejection opportunity, and watch how the fear diminishes in the face of your mental preparation. The voluntary discomfort protocol. What if I told you that the fastest way to overcome rejection fear is to deliberately seek it out? Not just occasionally, but systematically, following a structured program designed to build your rejection immunity day by day? This is exactly what the ancient Stoic philosopher Seneca was getting at when he advocated for regular practices of voluntary discomfort. He would periodically sleep on the hard ground and wear plain clothes to remind himself that the things he feared losing weren't necessary for his happiness. I've adapted this wisdom into what I call the voluntary discomfort protocol, technique number 3 of our 10 Stoic approaches to conquering rejection fear. This protocol is simple but transformative. For 30 consecutive days, you will deliberately seek rejection through a series of challenges that gradually increase in difficulty. Here's how it works. On day 1, you start with something small. Ask for a 10% discount at a coffee shop or store. It doesn't matter if there's no sale or promotion. The goal isn't to get the discount. It's to practice asking for something where no is a likely answer. By day 15, you'll progress to more challenging requests. Asking a stranger for an unusual favor, requesting a tour of the kitchen at a restaurant, or asking someone to teach you a quick skill. By day 30, you'll be ready for the high-stakes request, something you genuinely want but have been afraid to ask for. This might be a raise, a date with someone you admire, or a business opportunity that feels out of reach. The beauty of this protocol is that it doesn't just help you overcome rejection fear, it rewires your entire nervous system through graduated exposure. Just as you build physical strength through progressively increasing weights, you build rejection resilience through progressively challenging social situations. Most people avoid rejection at all costs, never developing this psychological muscle. But through this 30-day challenge, you'll develop a superpower that few possess: the ability to ask for what you want without your heart racing or your voice shaking. The key is consistency. Missing even one day resets your progress because your brain needs the consistent message that rejection is normal, survivable, and even valuable. Throughout this protocol, document everything. Record what you asked for, the response you received, and most importantly, how you felt before, during, and after. You'll notice a pattern emerge. What terrified you on day 3 barely registers by day 20. Remember, the goal isn't to get yeses, it's to get comfortable with no's. Each rejection is a successful outcome because it's building your immunity to fear. Seneca would be proud of you for embracing discomfort voluntarily, rather than having it thrust upon you. By choosing when and how you face rejection, you regain control over your fear response and develop a freedom that most people never experience. The spectator method. Have you ever noticed how differently you react to a friend's rejection compared to your own? When a friend gets turned down for a date or denied a job opportunity, you can usually see the situation clearly. You know it's not the end of the world. You know it doesn't define their worth. But when it happens to you, suddenly it feels catastrophic. This difference in perspective holds the key to our fourth technique, what I call the spectator method. Imagine you're watching a movie of yourself experiencing rejection. The camera isn't just focused on your face, it's pulling back, showing you from above, then pulling back further, showing the building you're in, the city, the country, the planet, the solar system. From this cosmic perspective, how significant is that single rejection? This is technique number 4 of our 10 Stoic approaches to conquering rejection fear. The spectator method draws directly from the Roman Emperor Marcus Aurelius, who wrote in his Meditations about viewing events from above, seeing the tiny, temporary nature of human concerns against the vast backdrop of the universe. Here's how to apply this technique. The next time you face rejection, mentally step outside yourself. Imagine floating above the scene, watching yourself and the person rejecting you, as if you were observing two strangers in a documentary. Notice the physical space around you, the room, the building, the street. Expand your awareness to the neighborhood, the city, the country. Continue expanding until you're viewing Earth from space, a tiny blue marble in an infinite cosmos. From this perspective, does the rejection still hold the same emotional charge? Does it still define you? Of course not. It's merely a momentary interaction between two humans on a tiny planet, one of billions of such interactions happening every day. This mental exercise creates psychological distance between your sense of self-worth and others' responses to you. When you can observe rejection rather than being submerged in it, you gain freedom from its emotional grip. One of my clients, Michael, used this technique after being rejected for a job he desperately wanted. By mentally zooming out and seeing himself as just one of millions of professionals in his field, all of whom face rejection regularly, he was able to move past his disappointment within hours rather than dwelling on it for weeks. The spectator method isn't about suppressing your emotions or pretending rejection doesn't hurt. It's about gaining perspective that prevents rejection from controlling your self-image or future actions. Marcus Aurelius ruled the Roman Empire, the most powerful position in the known world at that time, yet he still practiced viewing his concerns from above. He understood that even emperors must gain perspective on their problems. This technique becomes more powerful with practice. Start by applying it to minor rejections, then gradually use it for more significant ones. Eventually, you'll develop the ability to automatically zoom out when rejection strikes, giving you immediate emotional relief and clarity. Remember, the goal isn't to become detached from your life, but to develop the ability to shift perspectives at will, to be both the participant and the spectator of your experiences. This dual awareness is what gives you power over rejection, rather than allowing rejection to have power over you. 5. The dichotomy of control. Reframe. Have you ever noticed how much emotional energy we invest in things we can't possibly control? We agonize over whether someone will like us, whether they'll say yes to our request, or what they'll think of us afterward. But here's the liberating truth. About 95% of what happens in any social interaction is completely outside your control. This brings us to technique number 5 of our 10 Stoic approaches to conquering rejection fear, what I call the dichotomy of control reframe. This technique is based on perhaps the most fundamental principle in all of Stoic philosophy, articulated by Epictetus at the very beginning of his Enchiridion. Some things are within our control, and some things are not. Simple words, but when applied to rejection scenarios, they become revolutionary. Here's how to implement this technique. Before any situation where rejection is possible, take out a piece of paper and draw a line down the middle. On the left side, list everything about the interaction that's within your control. On the right, list everything that isn't. What's within your control? Your preparation, your words, your tone of voice, your body language, your decision to make the request, your response to their answer. What's not within your control? The other person's mood, their personal preferences, their past experiences, their relationship status, their financial situation, their answer. This exercise isn't just theoretical. It's a practical tool I call the control inventory. By physically writing out these elements, you create a mental shift that's immediately calming. You realize that your anxiety has been focused almost entirely on the right column, things you can't possibly control. The Stoic solution is to transfer 100% of your emotional investment to the left column. Be proud of yourself for preparing well, for asking clearly, for responding gracefully, regardless of the outcome. One of my students, David, used this technique before asking someone on a date. He realized he had been obsessing over whether she would say yes, something completely outside his control. By shifting his focus to elements he could control, his genuine interest, his respectful approach, his clear invitation, he actually felt confident regardless of the outcome. And here's the ironic part. This attitude shift made him more relaxed and authentic, which actually increased his chances of getting a yes. The dichotomy of control reframe doesn't just reduce anxiety, it enhances performance. When you're not tangled up in worrying about outcomes, you become more present, more genuine, and paradoxically, more likely to succeed. This technique is particularly powerful for rejection scenarios because it addresses the core of rejection fear, the belief that others' responses somehow determine your worth. They don't. Your worth is determined by how well you handle what's within your control. Remember, the Stoics didn't advocate for this principle to help you manipulate others into saying yes. They advocated for it to help you find tranquility and freedom regardless of external outcomes. Start applying this technique to small rejection scenarios, then build up to more significant ones. With practice, the mental separation between what you control and what you don't becomes automatic, bringing immediate clarity and calm to formerly anxiety-producing situations. 6. The rejection post-mortem. What's the first thing you do after facing rejection? If you're like most people, you probably try to forget it happened, push it out of your mind, or worse, replay it over and over without any structure or purpose. But what if I told you that rejection's greatest value comes after it happens, through a deliberate process of extraction and analysis? This brings us to technique number 6 of our 10 Stoic approaches to conquering rejection fear, what I call the rejection post-mortem. Most people treat rejection as a failure to be forgotten, but the Stoics understood that every experience, especially difficult ones, contains valuable lessons if we approach them with the right questions. Here's how the rejection post-mortem works. Within 24 hours of experiencing any rejection, sit down with a journal and ask yourself 3 specific questions. First, what did this rejection actually cost me? Not what your fear says it cost, but the actual, concrete impact. When you answer honestly, you'll usually find that the real cost was minimal, perhaps some momentary discomfort or embarrassment, but rarely anything of lasting significance. Second, what did I gain from attempting this? This question redirects your focus to the positive aspects of taking action despite fear. Perhaps you gained practice, courage, clarity about what you want, or simply the satisfaction of knowing you tried. Third, what knowledge did I acquire for future attempts? Every rejection contains data points that can improve your next attempt. Maybe you learned something about timing, approach, or the specific person's preferences. I call this structured reflection the 3 questions technique, and it transforms rejections from failures into valuable data points. One of my clients, Jennifer, used this technique after being rejected for a speaking opportunity she really wanted. Through her postmortem, she realized the rejection actually cost her nothing but a few minutes of disappointment. She gained confidence in her ability to put herself forward for high-level opportunities. And she learned specific information about what the organizers were looking for, which she used to successfully land a different speaking gig just weeks later. The key to making this technique work is timing and documentation. Don't do it immediately after rejection, when emotions are still high. Wait at least a few hours, but no more than a day, and write your answers down. The physical act of documentation turns fleeting thoughts into concrete learning. This technique isn't just about feeling better, though it certainly accomplishes that. It's about extracting maximum value from experiences most people waste. It's about building a database of rejection intelligence that makes each subsequent effort more effective. The Stoics believed that every experience, even painful ones, could serve our growth if approached with the right mindset. The rejection post-mortem embodies this philosophy by transforming rejection from something to be avoided into a valued source of personal development. Begin applying this technique to your next rejection experience, no matter how small. You'll be amazed at how quickly it shifts your perspective from seeing rejection as failure to seeing it as feedback. Crucial information that others miss because they're too busy nursing their wounded egos. 7. The virtue-centered approach. Have you ever noticed how our culture measures almost everything by outcomes? We're taught that success means getting the job, landing the deal, receiving the yes. But what if I told you that this outcome-focused mentality is exactly what makes rejection so painful? What if there's a completely different way to measure success? One that makes rejection virtually powerless? This brings us to technique number 7 of our 10 Stoic approaches to conquering rejection fear, what I call the virtue-centered approach. At the heart of Stoic philosophy is the radical idea that the only true good is virtue, living with courage, justice, wisdom, and moderation. External outcomes, including whether people accept or reject us, are ultimately indifferent to our true worth. Here's how to apply this life-changing principle. Rather than measuring success by outcomes, did they say yes? Measure it by the courage you displayed in asking. Rather than tracking acceptances, track acts of bravery. I've developed a practical tool called the Courage Account to implement this approach. Think of it as a bank account, where the currency isn't dollars, but acts of courage. Every time you risk rejection, whether you get a yes or a no, you make a deposit into this account. The beauty of the Courage Account is that it's completely within your control. No one can prevent you from making deposits. No one can take away what you've already deposited. Your worth isn't determined by how others respond to you, but by your willingness to take virtuous action despite the possibility of rejection. One of my students, Mark, transformed his dating life with this approach. Instead of measuring success by how many women said yes to dates, he started measuring it by how many women he approached with genuine interest. Suddenly, rejection lost its sting because each no still represented a successful deposit into his courage account. This virtue-centered approach creates something remarkable: immunity to rejection anxiety. When your self-worth is tied to your virtuous actions rather than others' responses, rejection may still sting momentarily, but it can't devastate you. It can't stop you from trying again. The ancient Stoics weren't just philosophizing when they emphasized virtue above all else. They were offering a practical psychology for resilience in a world where external outcomes are often beyond our control. This approach doesn't mean you stop caring about results. It means you recognize that results are secondary to virtuous action. Yes, you want the job, the date, the opportunity. But your worth isn't determined by whether you get it. Your worth is determined by whether you had the courage to pursue it. Begin implementing this technique by creating your own courage account. Document every instance where you risk rejection. Celebrate these deposits regardless of outcome. Share your progress with a trusted friend who understands what you're working toward. With consistent practice, you'll notice something extraordinary happening. Not only will rejection lose its power to hurt you, but you'll actually start receiving more acceptances. Why? Because when you're not desperate for a specific outcome, you become more authentic, more present, and paradoxically, more compelling. The virtue-centered approach isn't just a technique for handling rejection. It's a complete reframing of success that can transform every area of your life. It's freedom from the exhausting cycle of seeking external validation. It's the ultimate Stoic gift: tranquility regardless of circumstances. 8. The social recalibration technique. What if I told you that most of your rejection fears are based on a fundamental misunderstanding of how other people think? That the harsh judgments you imagine others making about you exist primarily in your own mind? This brings us to technique number 8 of our 10 Stoic approaches to conquering rejection fear, what I call the social recalibration technique. Here's a shocking truth. Research consistently shows that we dramatically overestimate how negatively others will respond to our requests and how much they'll judge us for making them. This psychological bias, called the spotlight effect, makes us feel like we're on stage being scrutinized, when most people are actually far more focused on themselves. The social recalibration technique is designed to correct this distorted perception through evidence-based experimentation. Here's how it works. Instead of accepting your fearful assumptions about how people will respond to you, test them systematically through what I call rejection experiments. Choose a low-stakes rejection scenario, perhaps asking for a small, unusual favor from a stranger, and before doing it, write down your prediction. How will they, seeing rejection as failure to seeing it as feedback, crucial information that others miss because they're too busy nursing their wounded egos? 7. The virtue-centered approach. Have you ever noticed how our culture measures almost everything by outcomes? We're taught that success means getting the job, landing the deal, receiving the yes. But what if I told you that this outcome-focused mentality is exactly what makes rejection so painful? What if there's a completely different way to measure success? One that makes rejection virtually powerless? This brings us to technique number 7 of our 10 Stoic approaches to conquering rejection fear, what I call the virtue-centered approach. At the heart of Stoic philosophy is the radical idea that the only true good is virtue, living with courage, justice, wisdom, and moderation. External outcomes, including whether people accept or reject us, are ultimately indifferent to our true worth. Here's how to apply this life-changing principle. Rather than measuring success by outcomes, did they say yes? Measure it by the courage you displayed in asking. Rather than tracking acceptances, track acts of bravery. I've developed a practical tool called the Courage Account to implement this approach. Think of it as a bank account, where the currency isn't dollars, but acts of courage. Every time you risk rejection, whether you get a yes or a no, you make a deposit into this account. The beauty of the Courage Account is that it's completely within your control. No one can prevent you from making deposits. No one can take away what you've already deposited. Your worth isn't determined by how others respond to you, but by your willingness to take virtuous action despite the possibility of rejection. One of my students, Mark, transformed his dating life with this approach. Instead of measuring success by how many women said yes to dates, he started measuring it by how many women he approached with genuine interest. Suddenly, rejection lost its sting because each no still represented a successful deposit into his courage account. This virtue-centered approach creates something remarkable: immunity to rejection anxiety. When your self-worth is tied to your virtuous actions rather than others' responses, rejection may still sting momentarily. But it can't devastate you. It can't stop you from trying again. The ancient Stoics weren't just philosophizing when they emphasized virtue above all else. They were offering a practical psychology for resilience in a world where external outcomes are often beyond our control. This approach doesn't mean you stop caring about results. It means you recognize that results are secondary to virtuous action. Yes, you want the job, the date, the opportunity. But your worth isn't determined by whether you get it. Your worth is determined by whether you had the courage to pursue it. Begin implementing this technique by creating your own courage account. Document every instance where you risk rejection. Celebrate these deposits regardless of outcome. Share your progress with a trusted friend who understands what you're working toward. With consistent practice, you'll notice something extraordinary happening. Not only will rejection lose its power to hurt you, but you'll actually start receiving more acceptances. Why? Because when you're not desperate for a specific outcome, you become more authentic, more present, and paradoxically, more compelling. The virtue-centered approach isn't just a technique for handling rejection. It's a complete reframing of success that can transform every area of your life. It's freedom from the exhausting cycle of seeking external validation. It's the ultimate Stoic gift: tranquility regardless of circumstances. 8. The social recalibration technique. What if I told you that most of your rejection fears are based on a fundamental misunderstanding of how other people think? that the harsh judgments you imagine others making about you exist primarily in your own mind? This brings us to technique number 8 of our 10 Stoic approaches to conquering rejection fear, what I call the social recalibration technique. Here's a shocking truth. Research consistently shows that we dramatically overestimate how negatively others will respond to our requests and how much they'll judge us for making them. This psychological bias, called the spotlight effect, makes us feel like we're on stage being scrutinized, when most people are actually far more focused on themselves. The social recalibration technique is designed to correct this distorted perception through evidence-based experimentation. Here's how it works. Instead of accepting your fearful assumptions about how people will respond to you, test them systematically through what I call rejection experiments. Choose a low-stakes rejection scenario, perhaps asking for a small, unusual favor from a stranger, and before doing it, write down your prediction. How will they, confidently negotiating a six-figure job offer, something she would have previously accepted as given? The key to her success wasn't exceptional courage or talent. It was consistent practice of these techniques until they became automatic responses rather than conscious efforts. Begin your implementation by choosing just one technique from this video that resonated with you. Practice it consistently for 1 week before adding another. Build slowly but steadily. Remember, it's better to apply one technique consistently than to try applying all 10 sporadically. As you integrate these practices into your life, you'll notice something remarkable. Situations that once triggered intense rejection fear will begin to seem like opportunities. The world will open up as your fear shrinks back to its proper size. 10. The philosophical transformation. We've covered 9 practical techniques for overcoming rejection fear. But there's something even more profound happening beneath the surface of these practices. Something that transforms not just how you handle rejection, but your entire relationship with social approval and disapproval. This brings us to our 10th and final Stoic approach to conquering rejection fear, what I call the philosophical transformation. When you consistently practice rejection therapy, something remarkable happens. You begin to experience a fundamental shift in how you relate to other people's opinions. This isn't just a technique, it's a complete reorientation of your value system. The Stoics had a name for this state: apatheia, freedom from disturbing emotions. Not freedom from feeling emotions, but freedom from being controlled by them. It's the ultimate goal of Stoic practice and the natural result of consistent rejection therapy. Here's what this transformation looks like. When you first start practicing these techniques, you're still deeply invested in outcomes. You still want the yes. You still feel the sting of no. You're using these methods to cope with rejection that still matters deeply to you. But gradually, almost imperceptibly, something shifts. You begin to value your own assessment of your actions more than others' responses to them. You find yourself genuinely curious about rejection rather than fearful of it. You start to see that your fear of rejection was actually a form of self-imposed prison, and you now hold the key to your own freedom. This is what happened to Michael, who began rejection therapy as a painfully shy person, unable to express his opinions in meetings. After 6 months of consistent practice, he didn't just become better at handling rejection. He experienced a complete identity shift. He now saw himself as someone defined by his values and actions rather than others' approval. This transformation is supported by modern neuroscience. Research on neuroplasticity shows that consistent practice literally rewires your brain, creating new neural pathways that bypass your fear response. What begins as conscious technique eventually becomes your default way of engaging with the world. The ancient Stoics would recognize this process. Marcus Aurelius wrote that by consistently applying philosophical principles, we dye our soul with their color. We don't just learn the principles, we become them. I've seen this transformation in hundreds of students. They start rejection therapy, hoping to reduce anxiety about specific situations, but they end up discovering a profound freedom that extends to every area of life. Sarah began her journey terrified of dating rejection. Today, she not only dates confidently, but has found the courage to start her own business, speak publicly, and express unpopular opinions when necessary. The specific techniques gave her tools, but the consistent practice gave her freedom. This transformation doesn't mean you stop caring about connection or community. It means you stop being controlled by the fear of disconnection. It means you develop the ability to stand in your truth, regardless of whether others stand with you. Begin your journey toward this transformation by committing to consistent practice of these techniques for at least 3 months. Don't expect overnight results. This is a gradual unfolding, a slow reclaiming of your authentic self from the prison of social anxiety. The freedom waiting for you isn't just freedom from rejection fear. It's freedom to live according to your values, express your truth, and pursue your deepest desires without the constant need for external validation. This is the ultimate gift of Stoic rejection therapy. Not just techniques for managing fear, but a path to philosophical transformation. Conclusion. So this is where our journey together ends, but yours is just beginning. Every rejection you face isn't a step backward. It's proof you're finally moving forward. Remember, the Stoics didn't just talk about courage. They practiced it daily. Your fear of rejection isn't some unique personal flaw. It's the universal human condition that only a few have the wisdom to overcome. Starting today, seek rejection. Collect it. Own it. When you deliberately pursue what most people spend their lives avoiding, you gain something invaluable. Freedom. Freedom from the opinions of others. Freedom from the prison of social anxiety. Freedom to ask for what you truly want without your heart racing. This isn't just philosophy, it's liberation. Begin your 30-day rejection challenge tomorrow morning. The person you'll be 1 month from now, someone who smiles at the word no, is waiting to thank you for having the courage to start. The choice, as always, remains yours.